The story of these siblings is one that defies simple explanation. A duo engineered from birth to surpass the limits of human potential, their life reads like something out of fiction, except every detail is chillingly real. Born into a legacy of both brilliance and violence, Alice and Austin's trajectory was set long before they took their first breath. Their grandfather, a man of unparalleled intellect and influence only known to the public as Henry, spent millions ensuring that they would not only inherit the family's power, but that they would wield it in ways no one else could ever hope to. Chapter by the Big Guy. Henry was a man whose brilliance and ambition carved out a legacy that would forever shape his family's fate. An exceptionally skilled chemist, he built an empire by refining and perfecting the most sought-after drugs circulating on the streets of Canada, while simultaneously maintaining a respectful position as a pharmaceutical chemist in the public eye. His innovation didn't just make these substances more potent, but also longer lasting and safer for the end user. This refined product not only gave him control over a vast portion of the drug market, but also earned him both the admiration of clients and the ire of powerful rivals. It wasn't long before his superior product attracted unwanted attention. As his creations became the preferred choice, word spread, and his rivals began to feel the pressure of a shrinking customer base. Their distaste for him grew, but it was the law enforcement agencies that began to close in. The superior quality of the drugs made it clear to authorities that something unusual was happening in the underground market, prompting them to start probing for the source. For years, Henry had kept himself and his operations insulated from the chaos of the streets. He worked behind layers of anonymity, using various fronts and proxies to handle the day-to-day dealings. His lab, where he performed his chemical magic, was hidden from both his enemies and law enforcement. But no matter how brilliant, how careful he was, the empire he built was too big to remain hidden forever. His rivals, fearing his growing influence and the police pressure, would make a move that would shatter everything and serve as the foundation for which the future of these siblings would be built on, a future soaked in blood, secrets, and great power. Henry began to purchase various businesses around the area in an attempt to expand his influence into legitimate enterprises. Among these was the crown jewel of his business empire, a casino. The casino was more than just a business. It was a symbol of his success and a hub where he could blend the worlds of legality and the underground, allowing him to maintain control over both his illicit and lawful dealings. The casino itself wasn't too large, but carried a sense of luxury and excess, frequented by wealthy, powerful, and intelligent allies. Its opulence masked the darker dealings that occurred behind the scenes, making it a perfect front for his operations. It was here that Henry solidified his alliances and kept a careful eye on those who potentially sought to unseat him from his throne. For years, the casino provided a steady flow of legitimate income while discreetly facilitating meetings with clients and rivals alike. However, as his dominance grew, so did the resentment from those who had been driven out of the market by his superior products. Henry's casino, once his sanctuary, became a target. Rivals who had long been outmaneuvered by him conspired to end his reign. The final blow came not from law enforcement, who had been circling him for years, but from the criminal underworld that he had once ruled with an iron fist. January 15th, 2004, that evening, while in his private area, Henry was gunned down in cold blood. Authorities found his body with 17 bullets ripped throughout in a calculated assassination carried out by rival merchants. He was also found with a gold pocket watch. The casino, a place that once embodied his success and power, became his final resting place, a grim reminder of how far he had risen and how violently he had fallen. His death marked the collapse of his empire and set the stage for the next chapter of his family's legacy, one that would be carried forward by his grandchildren, Austin and Alice, under the weight of their grandfather's choices. Chapter 1, Plan B. After Henry's death, the remnants of his empire were left in disarray, but his legacy was far from over. Long before the bullets tore through his body, Henry had already set into motion his most ambitious project yet, one that would transcend his death and carry his lineage into new, uncharted territories. While Henry had built his fortune on chemistry and drugs, his true obsession was the potential to refine not just substances, but human beings themselves. His vision was to create heirs who could take the power he had amassed and elevate it to unimaginable heights. His lineage had always been special, but Henry wanted more. His grand ambition was to build successors who were genetically perfect, individuals who could blend intelligence, charisma, compassion, and aggression with unprecedented efficiency. Henry's ambition was clear. He needed a geneticist who not only excelled in their field, but was willing to work beyond the limits of traditional scientific ethics. The search for such a person required discretion, as tampering with human genetics for enhancement, rather than for medical necessity, was not only illegal, but highly controversial. Henry's wealth and influence granted him access to the fringes of the scientific community. Yet even within those circles, finding a geneticist with both the skill and the audacity for this project was no simple task. He started by reaching out to the underground biotech network, speaking to scientists whose work had been rejected by the mainstream for being too radical or dangerous. Yet despite their ambition, none had the expertise needed to alter human DNA in the way Henry envisioned. These were people with ideas, but no real experience with the kind of genetic manipulation he was after. Henry needed someone with a proven track record in human genetic engineering, someone who had successfully modified DNA at a fundamental level. It was through one of these clandestine contacts that Henry first heard about the professor. The professor was a shadowy figure known for groundbreaking research in the field of genetic engineering, but notorious for staying far from the public eye. With research on gene therapy that could have revolutionized the field of medicine, the professor's career had veered into territory too controversial for mainstream science, and he had vanished from public life. Henry knew that finding the professor would not be easy. This man had gone to great lengths to distance himself from his past, and his whereabouts were unknown. Over the next several months, Henry followed a trail of whispers from abandoned labs to private biotech conferences. His search led him to numerous dead ends, but eventually, through a series of well-placed bribes and favors, Henry learned of a hidden research facility on the outskirts of a remote city not too far from where his son lived. This facility, believed to be abandoned, was rumored to still house illegal genetic experiments, with the professor at the helm. When Henry arrived at the facility, he found it heavily guarded, and gaining entry proved to be a challenge. It took several more days of negotiations with local contacts before Henry was granted a conversation with the professor. The man who greeted him was not the celebrity geneticist Henry had expected, but rather a weary, reclusive scientist, wary of outsiders and distrustful of anyone who sought him out. The professor's once prominent career had been shattered by accusations of unethical practices, and he had retreated into the shadows to continue his work in secret. Henry explained his vision to the professor, outlining his desire to create a being that surpassed ordinary human limitations. The professor listened, his skepticism clear, but as Henry detailed the scientific possibilities, his interest piqued. The professor was no stranger to genetic modifications, having spent years perfecting gene therapies to combat inherited diseases. But Henry's proposition to push beyond curing illnesses and instead enhance the very essence of human biology was a challenge the professor found intriguing. However, the professor was also cautious. He explained that while altering physical attributes through genetics was within his realm of expertise, modifying the human mind was an entirely different challenge. For this, a neuroscientist would be required, someone who could ensure that the brain could adapt to the enhancements they intended to implement. The professor was not willing to proceed without this level of expertise, as any misstep could lead to catastrophic consequences for the child they were planning to create. This posed a new problem for Henry, finding a neuroscientist of equal caliber. The professor was clear. He would not proceed without a partner who could match his skill, and this partner would need to be someone who understood the complexity of the brain at the most granular level. Thus, Henry found himself searching for the next key player in his grand plan. Securing the professor's agreement had been a monumental task, but it was only the first step. With the professor on board, the blueprint for genetic enhancement was in place, but Without the second scientist, the project could not move forward. Henry's vision of a genetically perfected lineage was taking shape, but the obstacles ahead were still formidable. Henry's search for the second scientist proved to be even more challenging than his quest to find the professor. While geneticists who worked at the fringes of ethics were few, neuroscientists capable of understanding the complexity of genetic modifications to the brain were even scarcer. Henry needed someone with the capability to not only map the brain, but to alter it at the molecular level without compromising its functionality. For months, Henry combed through confidential records, delving into the underground medical research community. He contacted doctors who had lost their licenses for controversial experiments and scientists who had been blacklisted for their bold, unethical ideas. But none of them had the qualifications or the courage to join the project. It wasn't until Henry received a cryptic message from a former colleague of his father's that his search gained any real traction. The colleague suggested a reclusive neurosurgeon, a man whose name was whispered only in the darkest corners of the scientific world. The neurosurgeon had a reputation as brilliant yet unpredictable. His work in neuroscience had revolutionized the field in many ways, but his obsession with altering the human mind had ultimately led to his professional demise. He was forced out of the academic community after it was discovered that he had conducted illegal brain surgeries on patients in a secret lab, all under the guise of cutting-edge research. The man had vanished soon after, leaving behind only rumors of his whereabouts and work. Tracking down this elusive neurosurgeon took Henry to remote corners. His search took him through the underground medical circles of Canada and the United States, each lead bringing him closer yet still out of reach. On several occasions, Henry believed he had found him, only to discover dead ends or decoys. The neurosurgeon's disappearance had been meticulously planned, a clear sign of his brilliance but also his paranoia. Eventually, Henry got closer to his target. He found a former patient of the neurosurgeon, a man whose memory had been altered as part of an experimental procedure. Though the patient could not remember the details of the surgery, his fragmented recollections pointed Henry toward a small village nestled deep in the mountains of Switzerland. It was here, hidden in plain sight, that the neurosurgeon had created a sanctuary, continuing his work in secrecy. The journey to Switzerland wasn't easy. Henry had to take every precaution to ensure his presence would not be traced, knowing that the neurosurgeon would flee at the slightest hint of danger. When he arrived, he was met with suspicion, and it took days of convincing the villagers to finally reveal the location of the elusive doctor. Even then, the neurosurgeon's acceptance of the meeting was uncertain. It took Henry several more days to gain an audience with him, using his usual combination of wealth and calculated charm to finally secure the meeting. The neurosurgeon was a peculiar figure, more interested in his experiments than the world around him. His remote lab was filled with archaic-looking equipment alongside the most advanced technology Henry had ever seen, a bizarre fusion of old and new. Henry presented his proposal carefully, aware that this man had no interest in financial reward. It was the idea of testing his theories on genetic enhancement that intrigued the neurosurgeon. The opportunity to not only alter the brain, but to do so in tandem with genetic modifications presented a challenge unlike any other. Still, convincing the neurosurgeon was no easy task. The man was highly skeptical of working alongside anyone else, particularly another scientist who might challenge his methods. He was used to operating alone, unrestricted by the opinions of others. However, Henry played to his desire for control, presenting the project as a way for him to lead the neurological aspect of the genetic enhancements, free from the interference of governing bodies or ethical concerns. Ultimately, the neurosurgeon was swayed by the potential for discovery, as well as the opportunity to prove his theories correct. Once the neurosurgeon agreed to join the project, Henry wasted no time in bringing him together with the professor. The first meeting was tense. Both men were used to being the authority in their respective fields, and neither wanted to concede control. Henry acted as a mediator, ensuring that their focus remained on the goal. Over time, they began to see the value in each other's work, realizing that the professor's genetic modifications could create a brain capable of withstanding and even thriving under the changes he intended to make. Together, they began to outline the procedures that would take place once the child was conceived. The professor would focus on the physical aspects of genetic engineering, enhancing strength, agility, and resilience, while the neurosurgeon would concentrate on ensuring that these traits were supported by advanced cognitive functions. They planned to push the boundaries of both fields, creating a being who could surpass human limitations in both body and mind. Henry had finally secured the team he needed. The project was now on the verge of becoming a reality. With the professor and the neurosurgeon united, Henry's vision was closer than ever. However, as the details of the plan unfolded, it became clear that the scope of what they were attempting had never been done before. They were entering uncharted territory, and failure could mean not just the collapse of the project, but catastrophic consequences for the child they intended to create. Chapter 2: Birth of a Star. With all things considered, the process of creating Alice began. The groundwork for her genetic and neurological enhancements involved some of the most advanced techniques in modern science. The genetic modifications were primarily executed using CRISPR-Cas9, a revolutionary tool for genome editing. CRISPR-Cas9 functions by utilizing a guide RNA to direct the Cas9 enzyme to a specific location in the genome. Once there, Cas9 introduces a double-strand break in the DNA, which the cell then attempts to repair. Scientists can harness this repair process to introduce new genetic material or correct existing sequences. In Alice's case, this involved the precise insertion of sequences that encoded for enhanced physical and cognitive traits. One of the major modifications involved enhancing Alice's adaptability to extreme environments. This required editing genes associated with thermoregulation and metabolic efficiency. The specific genes targeted included Pt.1, uncoupling protein 1, which plays a crucial role in regulating body temperature by dissipating energy as heat. By introducing variations found in cold-adapted animals like Arctic foxes, Alice's body could better manage extreme cold. For heat tolerance, modifications were made to the HSP70, heat shock protein 70 genes, which help protect cells from stress-induced damage, allowing Alice's body to endure extreme heat. Another key trait was Alice's heightened compassion towards animals. This involved editing genes related to the oxytocin receptor. The oxytocin receptor, encoded by the OX-TAR gene, is crucial for emotional bonding and empathy. By introducing genetic variants associated with increased oxytocin receptor density and sensitivity, Alice's brain would have a more robust system for processing emotional bonds, particularly with animals. In terms of her intellectual and behavioral profile, Alice was designed with an unshakable intellectual integrity. This required modifications to the FOXP2 gene, known for its role in language and cognitive functions. Alterations to this gene were intended to enhance her ability to process and articulate information with extreme accuracy. Additionally, modifications were made to the BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor gene, which is crucial for cognitive functions such as learning and memory. By enhancing BDNF expression, Alice's cognitive capabilities were significantly improved, allowing for superior information processing and retention. Emotionally, the modifications targeted the limbic system, particularly the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Genetic changes were made to the COMT catechol-O-methyltransferase gene, which influences emotional regulation and impulse control. By introducing specific genetic variants, Alice's ability to regulate her emotional responses and avoid harming loved ones was ensured. These modifications were coupled with changes to the SLC6A4 gene, which regulates serotonin transport and impacts mood and emotional stability. Alice's resilience was another critical aspect. This involved enhancing genes associated with stress response and physical endurance. The NR3C1, nuclear receptor subfamily group C member 1 gene, which encodes the glucocorticoid receptor, was modified to improve the body's response to stress. Additionally, changes were made to the ACTN3, alpha-actinin 3 gene, known for its role in muscle function and endurance. These alterations provided Alice with exceptional physical stamina and the ability to endure extreme stress. The implementation of these genetic modifications required meticulous testing. During early development, Alice's embryo underwent comprehensive gene expression profiling. This technique involved analyzing the expression levels of genes to ensure that the introduced modifications were functioning as intended. Techniques such as quantitative PCR and RNA sequencing were used to monitor these expressions. In utero development was closely monitored using biochemical markers. This included assessing the levels of specific proteins and metabolites to confirm the absence of unintended mutations. Techniques like amniocentesis and chorionic villus sampling were employed to sample the amniotic fluid and placental tissue, respectively, ensuring that Alice's genetic modifications were stable and without adverse effects. Once Alice was born, her development continued to be observed rigorously. Functional MRI, fMRI, and P scans were used to monitor her brain activity and ensure that the neurological enhancements were effective. Cognitive and behavioral assessments were conducted regularly to confirm that the modifications to her intellectual and emotional capabilities were functioning as designed. The integration of these genetic and neurological enhancements marked the culmination of Henry's ambitious project. Alice was not merely a product of genetic engineering, but a groundbreaking achievement in the field of human enhancement. Her enhanced physical, cognitive, and emotional traits represented a new frontier in genetic science, one that promised to push the boundaries of human potential. As a final gesture of appreciation, Alice's parents approached the professors and requested that Alice be given a new last name, one that would honor the monumental work done and accomplished as a joint effort. A name that symbolized not only Alice's potential, but also humanity's newly found boundaries and ascension to further knowledge. It was then that the name Delstar was born. They later explained the name Delstar, translated to "from the stars." Chapter 3: Recipe for an Alice. From an early age, Alice Delstar exhibited traits that set her apart from other children. Even at the tender age of 2, she was quiet, observant, and often intensely focused on whatever task was set before her. Unlike other toddlers prone to emotional outbursts, Alice rarely cried or threw tantrums. Instead, she analyzed her surroundings with a calm, calculated demeanor that suggested an awareness far beyond her years. She seemed to instinctively understand that emotions could be tools, not merely reactions. Her ability to remain composed in situations where others might succumb to frustration or tears became one of the first signs of her extraordinary nature. Alice's early signs of intelligence were undeniable. By the age of 3, she had mastered complex puzzles that were far beyond the abilities of children twice her age. Her nanny, Maggie, often marveled at how quickly she could solve intricate problems, sometimes without any visible sign of struggle. What stood out, however, was not just her intellect, but her patience. Alice did not rush through tasks. She approached each challenge methodically, as if she were training her mind to work efficiently, even at this young age. Her grandfather, Henry, noted this in his journals, describing Alice as remarkably composed for a toddler, and commenting on her almost eerie ability to focus for extended periods without distraction. Emotionally, Alice was something of an enigma. While she wasn't devoid of emotions, she seemed to experience them differently than others. She could feel joy, but her expressions of happiness were subtle and controlled. She rarely laughed out loud, but would instead smile softly, her eyes betraying a deeper understanding of the moment. When she was pleased, it was often because she had succeeded in something, not because of an emotional reaction to external stimuli. If Alice did cry, it was usually calculated, a way to get attention or achieve a specific goal. This mastery of emotional manipulation, even at such a young age, was both remarkable and unnerving. Her interactions with others were similarly striking. By age 4, Alice had developed an acute awareness of people's emotions and could easily mimic the behavior she observed. If a situation called for her to appear upset, she could cry convincingly, her tearful expressions completely believable. If joy was expected, she could flash a bright smile, her eyes twinkling with what appeared to be genuine delight. Those close to her could rarely pick up on the fact that these emotions were often fabricated, displayed for the sake of social convention rather than an authentic response. Her ability to mask her true feelings became a hallmark of her personality, a skill that would only sharpen with time. Physically, Alice was always in control of her body. She learned to walk earlier than most children, and by age 5, she was already displaying a level of coordination and grace that was uncommon even in much older children. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and fluid, as though she were constantly calculating the most efficient way to navigate her environment. Whether climbing trees, running through caves, or riding bicycles, Alice moved with an uncanny sense of purpose, as if every action were part of a greater plan. At the age of 5, her training officially began under the rigorous Assassin's Cloaks program. But even before that, her natural instincts for physical discipline were evident. She took to physical activity with the same intensity and focus she applied to mental tasks. When asked to perform tasks that required strength or endurance, she did so without complaint, pushing herself to complete them with mechanical precision. Her father would sometimes watch her as she practiced balancing on narrow beams or performing basic martial arts stances, already recognizing that she was far from an ordinary child. What fascinated those around Alice was her capacity to blend into different social environments despite her emotional detachment. In family gatherings or playdates, she could easily adapt her behavior to match the expectations of those around her. If her peers were excited, Alice would feign excitement, carefully imitating their gestures and tones without fully immersing herself in the moment. Adults who interacted with her often remarked on how well behaved and polite she was, unaware that much of her behavior was a carefully constructed act. Despite her ability to mimic emotions, Alice's true personality was cold and analytical. She understood the importance of maintaining relationships, but it was clear that she viewed them as strategic assets rather than genuine emotional connections. She could charm when necessary, often winning the favor of adults and peers alike with her quiet intelligence and reserved demeanor, but there was always a sense that Alice was holding something back, that her affability was part of a larger, calculated approach to social interaction. One of the most telling signs of her intelligence during these early years was her growing understanding of manipulation. By age 5, Alice was already capable of subtly influencing those around her, often guiding them into doing what she wanted without them realizing it. If she wanted an extra treat or more playtime, she wouldn't ask outright. Instead, she would create scenarios where her caregivers would offer these things without her having to make a direct request. Her father and trainers noted this skill with both admiration and wariness, understanding that Alice's potential for manipulation would become an invaluable tool in her future, but also recognizing the danger of someone so young already mastering the art of deceit. Her emotional detachment didn't make her cruel, but it did mean that Alice was often indifferent to the feelings of others. If another child was upset, she might comfort them if it served a purpose, but there was no genuine empathy behind the gesture. To Alice, emotions were simply another variable to consider in her calculations, a way to achieve her goals or avoid unnecessary complications. Her ability to compartmentalize her feelings, even at such a young age, was both impressive and unsettling, as it hinted at a future where she could potentially become a master manipulator. Over time, Alice had fully embraced the duality that would come to define her: the ability to project any emotion on the outside while maintaining complete emotional control on the inside. This duality would become one of her greatest strengths, allowing her to navigate the complexities of her family's world with precision and grace. Though she was still young, it was already clear that Alice was a force to be reckoned with, someone who would one day become the embodiment of her father's vision for the Delstar legacy. In quiet moments, when Alice was left alone, she would often sit in contemplation, her mind always working, always analyzing. Whether she was thinking about her training or the people around her, it was clear that Alice was never truly at rest. She was constantly honing her mental and physical abilities, always preparing for the next challenge, the next test. Even at 16 years old, Alice Delstar was on the path to becoming something extraordinary, a person whose mind was as sharp as her body and whose emotional control was almost robotic. However, it would be wrong to say that Alice lacked all emotion. She cared deeply about her family, particularly her younger brother, Austin. Though her affection was not always overtly expressed, she was fiercely protective of him, watching over him with the same cold, calculated precision that defined the rest of her personality. She understood that Austin was important not just to her personally, but to the family's legacy, and she took her role as his older sister very seriously. Their bond, though not traditionally affectionate, was based on mutual respect, genuine love, and a shared understanding of their roles in the Delstar legacy. As Alice grew into her teenage years, these traits only became more pronounced. Her intelligence, physical prowess, and emotional detachment were refined under the watchful eyes of her father and the trainers assigned to mold her into the perfect warrior. Each day, she demonstrated a growing capacity for strategic thinking, both in combat training and in her interactions with others. She learned to mask her thoughts and feelings with such skill that even those closest to her could almost never discern what she was truly thinking. Chapter 4: Austin Akuma Delstar. Austin's genetic modifications, though based on the foundation set by his sister Alice, took a distinct path, emphasizing his cognitive superiority while still achieving impressive physical enhancements. The advancements in gene editing techniques in the 6 years between their births allowed for more precision, enabling Austin to reach new heights, especially in mental capabilities. Unlike Alice, whose enhancements were more physically oriented, Austin's modifications aimed at boosting his brain's processing power, memory retention, and adaptability. One of the major distinctions in Austin's genetic makeup was his enhanced neuroplasticity. Modifications to the BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, gene, which promotes the growth and differentiation of new neurons and synapses, were more advanced in Austin than in Alice. By increasing the expression of BDNF, his brain had a heightened capacity for learning and memory formation. This gave him an edge in absorbing new information quickly and adapting to novel environments or complex systems with ease, making him a natural problem solver. Additionally, his COMT catechol O-methyltransferase gene, which plays a crucial role in dopamine regulation and affects cognitive control, was further refined. Austin's variant was engineered to create an optimal balance of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, enhancing his working memory, focus, and executive decision-making without the emotional volatility that comes with heightened dopamine sensitivity. This allowed Austin to maintain an extraordinary level of mental clarity even under stress, which was a key difference between him and Alice, who was more physically reactive in high-stress environments. While Alice was modified for physical endurance, Austin's mental endurance was a primary focus. His NR3C1 glucocorticoid receptor gene, responsible for the body's stress response, was further optimized to improve his ability to handle cognitive stress. As a result, Austin could work under immense mental pressure for extended periods without suffering cognitive fatigue or burnout. This heightened resilience was critical for his role as the intellectual powerhouse of the family, making him capable of outthinking adversaries in high-stakes situations. Austin's genetic profile also included enhancements to the SLC6A4 gene, which regulates serotonin transport. By fine-tuning this gene, his emotional stability was heightened, giving him greater control over mood fluctuations and emotional responses. This was a deliberate design to contrast with Alice's emotional empathy, ensuring that Austin remained emotionally detached and focused on logical, data-driven decision-making. This modification aligned with the family's goal of making him a more calculating and rational individual, less swayed by emotional impulses, and more focused on achieving long-term objectives. In terms of cognitive speed and processing power, Austin's FOXP2 gene, which plays a role in language and complex thought, was significantly enhanced compared to Alice's. The modification allowed Austin to not only process information quickly, but also articulate complex concepts with precision. His brain could juggle multiple streams of data simultaneously, making him an exceptional multitasker, capable of absorbing and synthesizing information from a wide array of sources at lightning speed. A major advancement in Austin's design was the manipulation of the KCNQ2 gene, which affects synaptic transmission. Alterations in this gene allowed for faster communication between neurons, leading to quicker reflexes and heightened mental agility. Unlike Alice, whose physical reflexes were her defining trait, Austin's cognitive reflexes were far superior, enabling him to respond to mental challenges in real time with incredible speed and accuracy. Austin's modifications also included a significant boost to his spatial awareness and abstract thinking. The SRGAP2 gene, which is involved in cortical development and human intelligence, was edited to enhance his ability to understand and manipulate complex structures and systems. This made Austin not only adept at problem solving, but also at creating innovative solutions in fields that required a deep understanding of space, engineering, and theoretical constructs. Another significant genetic modification in Austin was his enhanced mathematical cognition. The Robo1 gene, which influences cognitive functions such as reading and numerical abilities, was heavily modified in Austin's genome. This led to an innate proficiency in mathematics and pattern recognition, allowing Austin to excel in areas involving logic, algorithmic thinking, and data analysis. While Alice's skills were more physically driven, Austin's prowess in mathematics and abstract problem solving became his intellectual hallmark. In terms of physical enhancements, while Austin's cognitive abilities were prioritized, he still benefited from unintentional physical gains. Advances in editing techniques meant that the ACTN3 gene, responsible for fast-twitch muscle fibers, was more efficiently activated, leading to unexpected improvements in his athletic performance. Although not on par with Alice's physical abilities, Austin displayed levels of stamina and strength that surpassed what had been originally intended, making him a well-rounded individual, albeit still more intellectually focused. Interestingly, Austin's metabolism was another area of difference. His FTO gene, which influences energy balance and metabolism, was modified to give him an increased metabolic efficiency, allowing him to maintain high levels of mental and physical performance without the need for frequent sustenance. This gave him an edge during prolonged periods of focus or physical activity, where energy reserves would typically deplete in normal individuals. One unexpected aspect of Austin's genetic modification was the enhancement of his sensory perception, excluding his eyesight. While his visual capacity was reduced, his other senses, particularly hearing and touch, were significantly heightened. The KCNQ4 gene, involved in auditory function, was modified to improve his ability to perceive subtle sound frequencies, which, coupled with his cognitive speed, allowed him to process auditory data faster than most humans. Similarly, Austin's tactile perception was amplified through modifications to the Piezo2 gene, which governs the body's mechanosensation, the ability to detect pressure, texture, and vibrations. This modification allowed Austin to gather more information from his environment through touch, compensating for his compromised vision. His heightened tactile sense made him exceptionally skilled in activities requiring fine motor control or physical manipulation. Austin's immune system was also enhanced. The HLA genes responsible for immune function were carefully edited to provide resistance to a broader spectrum of diseases, both viral and bacterial. Unlike Alice, who was designed to withstand extreme physical conditions, Austin's modifications focused on intellectual longevity and the protection of his cognitive abilities from neurodegenerative diseases. The enhancement of his immune system was intended to ensure that his brain remained fully functional well into old age. Finally, the most closely guarded aspect of Austin's genetic modifications involved certain unknown traits that were kept secret from the public. His immediate family and instructors knew about these additional modifications, which were experimental and pushed the boundaries of what was ethically permissible in human genetic engineering. These traits were designed to ensure that Austin would surpass his sister's capabilities in ways that could not be predicted, giving him an edge that no one outside of his circle would expect. These unknown traits were engineered through the activation of dormant genes and the introduction of synthetic sequences, ensuring that Austin's genetic potential would continue to evolve over time. Chapter 5: The Devil. The fire that tore through the Delstar family home was more than just an accident. It was a deliberate act of violence orchestrated by ruthless adversaries. The date was etched into the annals of tragedy. Austin was just 2 years old, and his sister Alice was 8. The night had begun like any other, but it would soon be marred by a catastrophic blaze that would leave an indelible mark on their lives. It all started with a loud crash that shattered the calm of the evening. The sound was soon followed by the acrid stench of smoke and the sight of flames licking the edges of the Delstar home. The attackers, gunmen hired by rival drug lords, had targeted the residents with incendiary precision. The motive behind this brazen act of violence was rooted in mistaken beliefs. The rivals, seeing Henry's name still circulating in connection with the drug trade, wrongly assumed that the Delstar family was complicit. They were convinced that the family's perceived involvement in the drug trade necessitated this brutal act of intimidation. The attackers had executed their plan with ruthless efficiency, setting the house ablaze in a bid to eliminate what they saw as a threat. But their plan was destined to backfire. As the flames consumed the property, chaos ensued outside. Unbeknownst to the attackers, their attempt to instill fear and assert dominance was met with unexpected resistance. On the driveway, the bodies of 3 unrelated individuals were discovered, each with bullet wounds from a 1911 handgun. This grim evidence suggested a fierce and unanticipated confrontation, revealing that the attackers had not gone unchallenged. Inside the house, the situation was dire. The fire spread rapidly, fueled by the attackers' intent to cause maximum harm. In the midst of the inferno, Alice, only 8 years old, displayed extraordinary bravery and resilience. Amid the chaos, she managed to locate her younger brother, Austin. Despite the searing heat and blinding smoke, Alice's courage prevailed. She carried Austin out of the burning house, her actions a testament to her training and resolve. The physical toll on Austin was severe. Burns marked his right thigh, arm, and stomach, a constant reminder of that fateful night. The aftermath of the fire left the Delstar family grappling with both physical and emotional scars. For Austin, the burns were not merely superficial wounds, but symbols of a night that had profoundly shaped his character. These injuries, inflicted by the flames, became permanent reminders of his vulnerability and the bravery of his sister. Austin's recovery was not just physical, but deeply psychological. His personality began to emerge in the wake of the trauma, revealing traits that set him apart from others. Despite his young age, Austin exhibited a profound sense of loyalty and dedication to those he loved. His experiences had imbued him with a deep-seated commitment to protect and care, reflecting a level of emotional depth that belied his years. Austin's kindness towards those he cared about was evident in his actions and decisions. He approached relationships with a sense of responsibility and a willingness to make personal sacrifices. He was prepared to go to great lengths to ensure their well-being. His interactions with animals and his approach to diet were reflective of his ethical stance. His choice to follow a predominantly vegan diet, consuming animal products only when necessary for nutritional reasons, was a manifestation of his respect for life. His affection for animals was not merely a pastime, but an integral part of his moral framework. In social situations, Austin navigated interactions with a blend of intellectual sophistication and emotional detachment. His ability to analyze and understand people allowed him to adapt to different environments while maintaining a level of emotional control. Despite his detached demeanor, Austin's actions were guided by a strong sense of purpose and a commitment to his values. Austin's emotional complexity was marked by his capacity to compartmentalize feelings. While he could be strategic and detached, he also demonstrated a genuine capacity for empathy and care, particularly towards those who deserved it. This duality allowed him to manage his relationships with precision and depth. The trauma of the fire and the subsequent scars were not just physical, but symbolic of Austin's resilience and character. They represented not only his survival, but also the love and protection he had received from his sister. As Austin grew older, these traits continued to define him, shaping his actions and interactions in profound ways. Austin's journey from the fire that scarred him to the person he became was marked by a complex interplay of loyalty, kindness, and strategic thinking.